Hi, welcome to Thinking Green. I'm Rana, and I'm here today with Rosa Pepper-Macias.
That's it.
Thank goodness. Who's joining me. This weekend, we're going to be seeing No Kings demonstrations, rallies across the state, across the country, and that is not all we're going to talk about today, but because these events are coming together of many organizations focused on human rights in all different directions, I thought it would be good to talk about what's coming up and to find out what some of these organizations are about. So welcome, Rosa.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for making the drive. I guess to start out, maybe you can talk about how you started getting involved in activism, you know, on so many fronts, you know, over the last several years.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly been a important time to get involved, and as I sort of came into my political self was around the time that I started transitioning, and I showed up at an event in New Haven that was talking about labor's role in fighting back against pinkwashing and for you know, a real working class type of pride, and a pride that was actually focused on queer liberation rather than on making corporations look good and have, you know, rainbow flyers and things like that.
Yeah, capitalist pinkwashing.
Yes, exactly. And so as a part of that, I started getting more involved with Workers' Voice, which is a revolutionary socialist group. We're a national group. And I, you know, as I got involved there more and more, I started attending Palestine events. I was a student at the time, and so was organizing as a part of, you know, like Palestine groups on my campus and also on the statewide level. You know, we put together big rallies that were supposed to happen at all the different schools around the state, and so we were trying to get the largest possible groups of people to show up and continue fighting for Palestine. And then, yeah, that's sort of how it all started. I got more involved in immigrant rights as I graduated, and I'm a line cook. I'm in a union. I'm a hospitality worker, and so that's part of where I am at now.
Oh, yeah, and as you say that, as a hospitality worker, you're really kind of on the front line of worker woes. I was a preschool teacher for 30 years, and it was, you know, uncanny to me that, you know, very low status job, very low paid job. You needed a college degree to do it, you know, and all kinds of knowledge and personal skills, but it didn't count for much, and it was very resistant to unionizing. Mm-hmm. I was involved in a few unsuccessful attempts. We never did succeed. So let's talk about some of the organizations that you've been involved in. But first I wanted to ask you, you know, when you talk about Palestine, many more, you know, people I talk to about how important Palestine is, and people who watch this show or talk to me know that it's a really personal issue for me as a Jewish person who lived in Israel 50 years ago, who had a much different vision of what that place could be, being so like appalled and betrayed by what really was happening. But they see it as far away, and yet it really is a local issue as well, because it's been a long time since I saw a college campus, many college campuses shut down, students arrested, students injured over an issue. So what did that feel like?
Yeah, I mean, I think when we're talking about how this stuff comes home, there's a couple different ways that we can start. The most clear-cut example is the fact that you have the same repressive technologies that they're using to police borders in Gaza, in Palestine. The same security cameras are being used on university buildings, and they're being used to surveil a student movement that was, very close to igniting like a real massive mass movement in this country and across the world. I mean, I was studying abroad in Madrid during the first upsurge of the youth movement, and I remember going to the encampment in Madrid and seeing how it was organized and learning so much from the way that they got everything together. But here in Connecticut, I think the other way of looking at it is that we have, millions enormous amounts of money go to like the military-industrial complex within this state, and we have to ask ourselves, well, what can a world look like that doesn't actually need to chase this profit that they're making in these factories, and if those factories could be retooled to produce for human need. And so when we were talking about this stuff on the campus, it was very clear that the issue of Palestine was an issue for working people in the United States as well.
And that's actually a subject that's very near and dear to me as well, living in New London and seeing how our local economy over the last decade and a half has become increasingly dependent on weaponry. Mm-hmm. Electric Boat was always a big regional employer, and about 15 years ago, they opened up their plant in New London, and a lot of the economic development, the kinds of housing that's being built, the kinds of businesses that are being encouraged, is targeting the workers who are coming to work at Electric Boat on weapon systems. And our economy is less diverse than it was 30 years ago, because the easy dollars are on war and harm. So yeah, that's it hits locally in a lot of ways. So what kind of experience was it in the U.S. just seeing, I don't know, how the extent to which free speech was being penalized and clamped down?
Yeah, so I witnessed the sort of slowdown in the fall of my senior year, and there was like not as many new people entering into the movement, and the protests were sort of getting smaller, and it was a little bit demoralizing. And then I witnessed, I got the news that Mahmoud Khalil had been detained by ICE agents at Columbia, and this was like a great leader of the Columbia protest movement and all this stuff, and a well-known figure. And immediately we sprung into action to try to build in defense of Mahmoud Khalil, because the repression that the federal government was using presents like a really good example of the connections between various movements, which are incredibly intertwined and important. And in the particular case of Mahmoud Khalil, seeing ICE agents actually, going in and taking a student for using his free speech, and that is something that every person can get behind. We live in a country that prides itself on this freedom of speech.
In theory, yeah, Amendment number 1.
Mm-hmm. And so it was very clear to a section of the movement that the way of proceeding was to, gather our forces, start a really principled defense of Mahmoud Khalil, and go to meet as many people on the basis of these are your rights that are now under attack. There are, free speech is something that we can only maintain if we use it, and we have to speak out in defense of Mahmoud Khalil. And what we found was that there's people who maybe they had, some, preconceived notions about the Palestine Solidarity Movement, or they, weren't in total agreement, but they can see that, well, it's not good to have a student taken from their university for exercising their right to free speech. That's what we're doing on these campuses, is learning. And so it was just so clear that people started coming around and actually learning more, and that's how you start opening those doors up and opening up conversations that can actually, build the movement and start bringing those people back in. And that's what we saw. We started a coalition right as Mahmoud Khalil was detained, basically to defend our rights. It's called the Wesleyan Rights Coalition. And we met weekly and held mass meetings that were open and public. And so when people came to those meetings, they started getting the feeling getting the feeling that they really had a stake and a responsibility for defending their rights and our rights, and for defending Mahmoud Khalil. And so that model, I think, is something that I want to encourage within the state.
It seems really important too. I think I learned back in middle school that the in crowd, they all know each other. They might have, their countries might be at war, but they're at the same big global fancy events, and the rest of us don't necessarily know each other, but would have so much more power if we did. So, and it's always interesting to me when kind of conservative people who do care about things like freedom of speech, come and ally with people who are more on the left.
Yeah, and I think that what's absolutely necessary is showing people that you do have skin in the game. You are a part of this, the people whose rights are being infringed upon right now. And so, you are needed in this fight back that we're trying to build. And I think that's been one of the real, the most important aspects of many of the campaigns that the CT Civil Liberties Defense Committee has been doing right now, is providing a entry point with one or two different campaigns, and showing how all of our rights are interconnected, and that by participating in protests and rallies and demonstrations and going canvassing and sign making and those kinds of events, people can actually start taking on more responsibility for the growth of a movement that's capable of defending our rights.
And it's so needed, and it's so hard. I think it is really very easy to see people get splintered off too. All kinds of cultural things, so many things that you can get mad at each other about that really don't count so much in the big picture. Do you want to talk a little bit? We've had other political parties on, because one problem that we have with our own system of government is we have two parties and they both really work for the same group. Mm-hmm. And so I've had guests of almost any sort of lefty minor party, additional party. I'll now have them on and talk to them about, we don't have representation, in the Democrats and the Republicans. So what would you say is the essence of workers' voice, and what does it bring to the political conversation that is maybe unique?
Yeah, I think the thing that drew me to Workers' Voice in the beginning that has been really which is necessary in this current moment, is a focus on working class issues that like apply and specifically resonate with working and oppressed people all across our country. And I really think that the way that it's discussed is like through the lens of the history of struggle and the history of the American working class and its fight against the people that wish to oppress it and the rest of the world. And so like at the first event that I went to, we were learning about, you know, how workers are able to oppose pinkwashing. And I think that's a good example of how we bring people together on a basis that's actually like, I'm sorry, I'm flagging. Yeah, that's part of what I found to be really enticing about it, is like I wanted to get to the heart of issues that resonate with the largest possible section of the population. Because as a person from a marginalized group, I don't see my liberation as something that's possible without the majority of society behind me and in solidarity with me. And I think the way that socialism has been explained to me in the simplest of terms is like the tendency towards an injury to one is an injury to all, or the slogan, an injury to one is an injury to all. And that's an old IWW slogan, but
yeah. And as a point of trivia, I think the very few employees that the National Green Party has are IWW affiliated, because even the state of unions in the U.S., there's a wide variation, and some are very corporate, as you know. So as you've progressed, and we have, you know, quite a socialist presence in the New London area. About 10 years ago when Mike Alowitz moved to New London, and we have a Red Square art hub in New London, which
is so cool.
Well, New London is a funny place because there are a lot of people who are very mainstream and conservative, but they're also used to seeing a lot of weirdness and take things in stride, especially if people who are doing some of these strange things are personable and friendly and involved in the community. So New London is a good place to come from that point of view, and maybe we should start trying to run socialist candidates, but I don't know. It's frustrating to get involved in electoral politics these days. It seems like more than ever, it's just treated as like a sports event with two teams, and you cheer for your team, and there isn't really a huge difference between the teams. There's
no option for working class people, and I think that's like one of the biggest things that we should be talking about and like discussing as big groups of people. And this is why we take every opportunity to open up political discussions in all of these mass movement spaces. So like if people are showing up to a No King's Day event, they might be going alone or as an individual, but we really see the importance of bringing folks to meetings and letting them talk and letting them explain their where they're coming from and hearing where somebody else is coming from. And that discussion can oftentimes be so that's what gets people to come back and continue participating and continue building a movement.
And I think the arts actually can be a real catalyst for that too. Mike Alowitz did a show and about 25 years ago went and did a mural project in Palestine, and the theme was kind of the workers don't have a border between them. the employers might, but the workers really are all on the same playing field. And so he had projects, murals that Palestinian and Israeli artists and artisans, created together. So I think that maybe that's one reason why New London seems to work well. But as you were talking about people meeting at the events, I don't think it's just in New London that there are sign-making events, and there are other support activities that happen that are opportunities for people to meet each other who might not otherwise.
Yeah, so on March 8th, we had a big planning meeting. Well, it was more like a indoor rally almost. There were so many people there, and we had speakers from all sorts of organizations, from Unidad Latina and Acción to SNUI, Stanford Norwalk Unites for Immigrants, from the Reach Fund and Justice for Stephen Barrier. And all these speakers got together to motivate turnout for the 328 No King's Day event. And people broke out into breakout groups that were based on different areas. Like we had a labor breakout group, which I attended, and breakout groups for various cities around the state. And those cities were able to put together contingents, which were talking about things like stop the war on Iran, abolish ICE, bodily autonomy now, hands off our right to speak and vote, stopping the billionaire agenda. And they took those demands to their cities. They hosted sign-making events. They hosted planning meetings and things like that. And I think those little meetings where you have a couple folks over to a coffee shop and you start talking about politics, you share, oh, I read this article, and those types of conversations are where I think really the movement is able to pick up steam and is able to develop. So I think that what we're going to see on March 28th, is that there's going to be significantly more contingents of people from groups that are working together, various different community groups, political groups coming together to form contingents around certain issues and raise very specific demands like the ones that I listed. And I think that's a big development for the movement.
And I went to the follow-up meeting in New London, and it was an interesting cross-section of people. They weren't just the usual, I'm in the committee against nuclear war and a lot of peace groups, but there were a lot of people coming out now who I don't think have a real history of doing protests, and things have gotten so outrageous, and maybe I think marginalized people are still much more threatened and unsafe than the rest of us. But there are a lot of people who feel vulnerable who never thought it would come to that. And it's sort of sad that it came to that was the only way to draw them in, but it is drawing people in.
And now that people are coming around to these perspectives, I think it's imperative that we do our absolute best to give people real agency over the movement that they're coming to join and to be a part of, and allow them to take on the responsibility of actually making that movement happen. And so any kind of leadership that we can develop amongst new folks who are just coming around to the movement, we want to take every opportunity that we can get to do that kind of stuff. And I feel like I was the beneficiary of a lot of that. The Civil Liberties Defense Committee at every one of its meetings talks about the history of mass movements that have really fought and won and struggled in the United States of America and across the world. And I really feel like I've learned so much from that history of the struggle of working people and the struggle in defense of our rights.
And one of the interesting things about the Connecticut Civil Liberties Defense Committee is that it is a coalition. It isn't just, this is our vision and it's just us, a narrow group, which sometimes does happen, but the Connecticut Civil Liberties signs on to things, but it's actually representing a lot of people and groups who have signed on to that committee. Mm-hmm. So it's really has the potential to connect a lot of people who would not necessarily be connected. And I was interested in the New London meeting that some people who attended are definitely not on the same page politically as I am in some ways, but we're all doing this together, and I'm guessing we're all working people in some way or other. Some poor unfortunate people are employed in the military industries, and that's where the jobs are, and but I think we weren't seeing the mayor and the legislators there. Although locally at our New London events, we do see people like the mayor and the state rep show up and speak and mingle. I don't know exactly how they feel like they're connecting, but I think there's some recognition that something real is going on.
Absolutely. And I think, as new people enter into the movement, they will definitely, find their niches. And I think one of the great things about the history of movements is that you're able to learn about how these different tendencies grow and develop and change over time. And so, when we look back to the history of the immigrant rights movement, we see so many groups that start really flourishing around the year 2006 when there was a Day Without Immigrants. And that was a massive general strike that was built over the course of a few months in opposition to bills that were put forward by the Democrats and the Republicans, which were very anti-immigrant. And immigrant communities, documented workers, undocumented workers, allies and all sorts of supporters and political people just took to the streets on May Day of 2006, and they shut down so many different industries. They shut down agriculture, they shut down retail, they shut down all these kinds of things. And the effect of that was that the Democrats and the Republicans and the whole ruling class was terrified and had to walk back their bills, and they did. And what's been incredible about participating within the immigrant rights movement is that these folks are still around. They remember this day. There's millions of undocumented workers in this country who have a memory of that action. And when we're talking about getting together to defend our rights, it's been the strategy. And I was at a Unidad Latina and Acción meeting a few weeks ago where we were talking about a Day Without Immigrants in 2006, and a woman said that she had been there and that she remembers it and wants to do it again, and that all that we had to do this time was get everybody. And she was like, that was the issue about it last time, is that this or that group wasn't involved, but this time it's got to be everybody, and we have to reach that broadest section of the of working people in this country.
Yeah, so I guess this is a good time to talk about EULA as an organization. I know that a lot of the work is related to immigrants' rights, but I don't know that it's exclusively that.
It's a community organization that does a lot of work responding to the threats that immigrants face. And it is powered by the people who are in it and powered by that community and the strength of that community. And it was forged through the struggles around 2006 and onwards, and through big mobilizations around the Danbury 11 and all of these important moments in Connecticut immigrant history.
Yeah. I think that, I worked for Head Start, and I think it might have gotten reclassified under this administration, but it was one of the very few federal programs that was open to anyone, regardless of immigration status. So, I had students from families who were not documented that, maybe they had 4 kids and 2 were born here, so they could get health insurance, and the rest of the family had no insurance, and the parents had, jobs in convenience stores that were owned by relatives or cousins of cousins, but they really, were such a contribution to the culture in the classroom, and besides, very few of us really are natives on this land. My family has been here since the early 1900s. My grandparents came here, all 4 of them, and they weren't born here. I don't even know if my grandparents became citizens or not, but my parents were born here. So I'm second generation, but it seems so bizarre to me that people who may have been here for 100 years, maybe a little more or a little less, have such fear of immigrants. I don't understand it.
It's such an important part of American history. Many of the most important, winnings of working people in this country, and the places where we've actually succeeded in improving the rights that we have or gaining new rights, have been through the struggle of immigrant workers. The people who were stuck in the factories that, built massive strikes, like the general strike in Minneapolis, or in the 20s, or even the Haymarket affair, were immigrant workers, and that history exists within. And that the legacy of that history exists within this community. And what's so incredible to see in a community like ULA is that there's a real memory of, 2006, which is, I was 3. It's, and I know that for many that feels like, yesterday, but for me it's like being able to learn from those stories and then use those stories to make a plan for how we're going to continue in our fight and continue trying not only to, defend the rights that immigrants have, but continue to positively gain more rights, and always progressing by way of defending the rights that we have, but continuing and pushing for more and more rights. There should be, it should be absolute, there should be papers for everybody.
Oh yeah, and I'm actually surprised that this past year that food prices haven't actually skyrocketed more than they have, because so much of our food system is dependent on immigrant workers. And we lived in, Bob is from Oregon, and he used to pick beans next to immigrant farm workers, and he'll tell you that they were a whole lot better at it. But under the current climate, if I were living south of the border, I'm not sure I'd want to set foot here. So I really suspected that with, between being really unwelcoming to immigrant labor, although it's more like schizo, I guess, you want the work without the people who are doing it. But also, kind of not having good relations with countries that we import from, it just makes no sense that would be a policy. And I'm kind of surprised that we haven't suffered more from it.
I mean, I think one of the biggest things that I continue to think about when it comes to the way that immigration works in this country is the fact that so many people are being negatively impacted in Latin America by U.S. imperialism. And, American involvement in Latin America is
and it's been long-standing for at least since the late 1800s.
Yeah, and we need a movement in this country that can stop that intervention and end U.S. intervention in Venezuela and end U.S., like sucking all of the profits out of these countries that would otherwise allow these countries to, create, allow the people to live a dignified life. And so, but in order to get that done, what is needed is a mass movement in all of the countries of Latin America, as
Right.
well as a mass movement that's united with a mass movement here in the United States that can overcome and force the powers that be to stop this brutal occupation and thievery.
Yeah, it's kind of an ironic situation, and the U.S. seems to always be working at cross purposes, with ourselves even, that if you don't want immigration, then from the southern part of the hemisphere, then you shouldn't be making life intolerable for people who are already there. I mean, the whole war on drugs was just devastating in its way on many South American countries, and it was certainly exacerbated, if not totally, something of the making of the U.S. So yeah, we have people at our borders partly because we messed up where they live.
Yeah, and I think for many people in my personal life and in my workplace and things like that, there is a sense that this, this current situation that we're in is needs to be fought back against. That we need to step up and fight for this country right now, or fight in this country right now, and really build the kind of movement that can really force a fundamental change in the system of our world economy.
Yeah, well, there are so many ways we can go to talk about environmental degradation too, but I think that we should let people know about the events that are coming up on Saturday. I did make a couple of slides about some of the towns where there will be no King's Day events. There will be one in New London at the Whale Tail, and I put on the left the demands that came back to the local groups, and they did come back and were voted on in New London at our coffee house meeting. But they're all over the state, and they run, in different time slots, from 8 a.m. into the evening. But this Saturday, 10 a.m., Parade Plaza by the Whale Tail Fountain, right across from the train station in New London. There will be a No Kings event. And then I think I also made a slide for New Haven and Hartford.
Just one more note on the New London side. Across the street at the Amtrak station, the New Haven contingent that is being built under those demands will be meeting around the start of the.
That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that train station is a great place. I was a little confused about what's happening in Hartford. There seem to be two somewhat different events happening at the same time on different sides of the Capitol building. I'll probably stay in New London, but I'm hoping that people who go to Hartford will visit both sides. I'm not sure why that happened, but it's, I don't know. I guess it could be an opportunity for some groups that are somewhat aligned but not really working together to maybe work together more in the future. I wanted to talk about another thing that's going on. The following week, or a week or two later, Professor Dr. Tom Alter is going to be doing a Connecticut tour. Do you want to talk a little bit about what he's gone through?
Yeah, of course. So Tom Alter is a historian of labor and working class protest movements at a university in Texas. And as he was speaking on his own time as a private citizen, he was speaking at a socialism conference. He got clipped by a self-described fascist and got reported to the university administration, which fired him. Now keep in mind, this is a tenured professor, a union guy, and somebody who studies how to build a movement. And so we have been working with his group to raise a bunch of money so that he can pay his mortgage while he tours around the country, educating people on how to fight back against this kind of attack on our freedom of speech. And I think that that's really what we want to use these meetings to do, is talk about how defending our freedom of speech is possible, because a lot of times I think it can feel like our rights are just gone. But like when Mahmoud Khalil was taken, it felt like there was this real pessimistic air about it. But through the defense of somebody like Tom Alter, who's stepping up and talking about building a mass movement in defense of him and a defense of all of academia, and like in defense of people's right to study what they want to study and talk about what they want to talk about. What we're seeing is that these meetings are really great spaces to learn about the most effective way of getting the goal that we want, which is the freedom of speech.
Yeah, and I think that there's a lot of fear of education, and fighting back has been shown to work. Even recently, we can look back in history. I once heard a talk, and the person said, you look back at all these things like women getting the right to vote and child labor laws, and you look back and you think that was inevitable, but the point he made was, but it didn't feel inevitable to the people in the middle of the struggle. Mm-hmm. And I feel like now we are in that middle of that struggle, but is it going to be something that in 50 years people say, oh, it was inevitable that, these assaults on the freedom of speech would just, be fought back against, and the people who are trying to impose that would just, feel themselves threatened.
Yeah.
That, that's off limits.
Well, I'm optimistic about it, I think, because, Tom Alter and the story of Tom Alter is applicable to everybody. Everybody has the freedom of speech, supposedly. And I mean, if we fight for it.
Right.
But he's a union guy, so I mean, this is the right of all union members to speak on their own time as individuals. He's being defended in part by his union siblings and through his local, and it's like enormously important for unionized labor to come to his defense right now, because that is the strength of unionized labor and can really broaden this struggle out beyond merely academia. And we know, and it already has gone that way, in that direction. Like, he's been showing up on these university campuses and meeting people who are not from the university environment, but who care about their own right to free speech. And I think that's how we build a movement. That's how we progress.
And it seems like, I don't know, the group that is suppressing the free speech is not really very strategic. I'm kind of grateful that they're not. But I think when people fight back, they really often don't know what to do. So I'm looking forward. He'll be in New London, and as you saw, I think there are still dates being scheduled. It sounds as though they're going to be filling up every day he's here.
Yes, but in New London, he'll be over at the Washington Street Coffee House at 6:30 on.
I think it's is it the, you know what, I have a picture here. I'll have to remember. Which day is it? He is Wednesday, April 8th? No, I can't even read the time. It's, thank you.
There we go.
Thank you, Drew, for putting up the slide. Wednesday, April 8th, 6:30 to 8 p.m. at Washington Street Coffee House,
Yes.
which isn't a huge venue, but it's a good venue to have a lot of discussion and, meet people. I think that's an interesting fight, too. Many of the academics who have had action taken against them on the Palestine genocide have been Jewish, and it's like starting to shatter this whole, well, if you criticize Israel, you're an anti-Semite kind of dogma that some people don't question, but really makes no sense.
I think like one of the biggest things with Tom Alter is that he's so, universally applicable because his focus is on these mass movements. Yeah. And so that's what he's great at talking about, and that's what he's, able to teach us, as a professor. And it's, I think it's such a great example of how labor history and working class struggle can, be really, really inspiring to, build this kind of defense campaign, this kind of fight back, this kind of, defense of our free speech.
Well, I like to think that having this happen to him, which couldn't have been pleasant, has kind of given him the opportunity to have a large-scale practicum of his work.
Yeah.
So I don't know. So looking ahead a little bit more, I wanted to talk, I know that there aren't settled plans for May Day, but May Day in New Haven traditionally has a lot going on, and I was wondering, if you know what's in the works a little bit for this year?
I don't know exactly what's in the works this year. There's been lots of talks and lots of organizing, but what I do know is that at that March 8th meeting, which was called by a bunch of different groups, we decided to really focus on the real building of May Day, the more down to earth stuff, say like the flyering, the canvassing, trying to get churches on board with putting banners that say all out for May Day or May 1st. And those are the kinds of building efforts that I think folks are really going, or that we should be expecting on May Day this year, and that we should be joining. I think one of the big keys to participating in something like that is, checking out a contingent or a group that that you can join and actually go and do that work. So if you're interested in doing any of that building, the CT Civil Liberties Defense Committee website is, I think, Connecticut, or ctcivilliberiesdefense.org. And that organization is organizing groups of people to go out and knock on doors. And I actually did this, I had the unfortunate luck of doing so in a blizzard, but we were like going out and knocking on doors, and it was really refreshing to go without like a pitch or a candidate or something like that, because we would just go and be like, hey, we're all going to, this meeting. What do you think? What do you think about politics? What do you think about what's going on in the world? And, what are the issues that are most important for you? And the conversations were really illuminating. Like, people are looking for more ways to get involved. And I think that that's really what we want to foster.
And we do only have about 4 or 5 minutes left. So I think maybe we can talk a little more about how people can be involved or be supportive of, well, any of the 3 organizations and the bigger movement that we've talked about. So I noticed on the ULA website, and I have the different websites for the 3 organizations, they are looking for volunteers with their immigrant work in defense of immigrants, from translation to, giving rides to whatever, in addition to donating. They're, of course, a 501c3. But what other ways would you, recommend that people get involved in any of these groups?
I mean, I think honestly the biggest thing that we can all do is show up to these protests, and not just as individuals, but really, I think, taking to heart this model of going as a group and bringing your coworkers, bringing the people in your congregation, bringing a group of your friends, family members, that kind of thing. And I think when we start really focusing on that kind of thing, that's where we're going to start really seeing the movement grow in a way that will allow it to win. So, I mean, there's like the big No Kings, May Day, mass mobilizations, which are a great place to start participating in that way. Another way of doing it is giving your friend a ride to a meeting of a group that you want to join. I recommend the ones that I'm in, but I think that like when it comes down to it, like the most important thing is starting to show up and starting to take responsibility for growing this thing.
Yeah, I keep feeling as though, I don't know what our society and government have traditionally provided, starts breaking down, that we have to kind of know like who in our community is good at doing what jobs, who can do carpentry, who can grow a garden, who needs their snow shoveled, or because I feel as though we might be having to set up, parallel systems to help with people's survival. So just one thought, and to all of you out there, I hope to see you either in New London or in one of the other many towns around the state. There are at least half a dozen, well, there are more than that. More like, when I looked at the list, there were about 20 towns, at least, that had No Kings events happening in Connecticut alone. So I'm hoping it'll be big.
It will be.
Well, thank you so much for coming on to the show. Maybe you can come back later and we can talk about more like what people can do on the electoral politics side, rather than or in addition to what we can do. It's just a movement of people who do the work and who live here and have rights.
And need to defend them.
Yes. Unfortunately, almost continuously, it seems like. So thanks a lot for coming here,
Thanks for
making the
having me.
drive from New Haven. And we'll talk to you again, and I hope to see everyone out there somewhere on Saturday.
I'll see you on Saturday.
And I'll see you next week. My guest is going to be Kyle Gauck, who is a Democrat challenging Joe Courtney for Congress this year, who's part of a PAC, endorsed by a PAC that's called Candidates of Courage, for defending positions that are not what's considered acceptable in these days. So we'll see you all next week, and thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
When the rain don't fall.